Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, when it comes to Diablo 4, lots of people will follow the meta builds for their class, but there is only one class in the game with so many good builds that even the ones that aren't actually meta are still insanely good, and that's the Druid. Don't get me wrong, every class has a number of good builds, but Druid has such a high number of great builds, even outside of the handful, that are at the very top of the barrel. And today we're going to take a look at Poison Werewolf. People have been asking for my take on a Poison Wolf in the comments for a bit now, and I've finally gotten around to it, spent a couple of days testing various things, and the results are quite simply a symphony of destruction that I like to call the Acid Rain build, due to the focus on poison damage and, well, how much you just sort of fly from one enemy to the next like you fell from the sky itself. Now, this isn't quite a meta build, of course, but it is strong enough to deck a tier 67 Nightmare dungeon, and it could likely complete up to a 90 in the defensive version of it if you play carefully enough, which is a point of power that most players rarely really actually want to go past, and so this build is more than good enough to use if you just like the idea of being a Poison Werewolf. Today I have two different versions of this build, one that is a bit weaker and doesn't really require any uniques, and one that is stronger but requires one or two to function at its highest ability. The first of the two also uses not only wolf companions, but werewolf companions. So hey, if you really want to be the thematic, jumping around poisoning things while your entourage of werewolf friends backs you up, that's the one for you. But again, it is just a bit weaker, still totally usable, but a much lower capped potential for higher end Nightmare dungeons due to the issues with companions and the current state of the game balance, as they just sort of die too easily to high level enemies. All that said, I'm going to break down the skill tree, the spirit boons, the legendaries and potential uniques to boost this build even further, the gearing strats and tips so that you know what equipment to aim for, as well as probably the best Paragon board that I've ever personally created, and then of course just how to play the build specifically and any tips that I've got for you from my time playing with it up to this point. Without further ado then, let's break on into the skill points itself. First up, for your basic skill, you want to get Storm Strike, its enhancement, and then also Fierce Storm Strike, altogether giving you a basic skill that grants 25% damage reduction for 3 seconds, chains to up to 4 total targets, has a 15% immobilize chance, and a silly 50% vulnerable application chance. Important to note here that this is for the Tempest Roar version of this build, but the build still functions without this unique, just a little bit weaker, in which case you would instead go for Claw with also the Fierce Claw enhancement for poison application purposes. The main loss here is the vulnerable application that you get from Storm Strike, but the poison is actually quite good to have too in relation. Then in the core skill cluster, we're going to be taking the full 5 ranks of Shred. Of course, I've got a bunch of extra ranks from armor, and you can actually get it up to 14 in active combat in this build if you forego a bit of defense, but I'll go over how we do that later in the Legendary and Unique section. We also grab the base enhancement for Shred, which gives us 30% increased attack speed with the skill, and also makes it heal you for 2% of your maximum life when it hits an enemy. Then Primal Shred as well, which makes every hit of the combo do a dash, and also gives it a 30% increased crit damage multiplier. Every part of this skill was buffed in patch 1.03 by quite a bit, and it's not the only part of this build that was buffed either, so this is actually as strong as it is now, thanks to that balance patch, which somehow made even more builds viable for the class with the most build variety even before the patch. Aside from that, we take a ton of passives in this cluster as well. 1 rank of Heart of the Wild, which gives us +3 maximum spirit, mostly just as a gateway to put 3 points into Wild Impulses for 9% more resource cost to core skills, but also 15% more damage with them, which is a positive trade-off. Then also 2 ranks of Abundance to make our basic skill generate 12% more spirit, which just lets us spend more time shredding.
Like cheese.
Then we also grab 3 ranks of Predatory Instinct for 3% increased critical chance. All damage that we do that can crit, being non-poison damage, is done at close range, so this is obviously great. You may be saying, hey, why are we taking crit things in a damage over time build? Well, there are some Druid passives that make this absolutely worth it, and we'll go over that soon too. We also grab 3 ranks of Digitigrade Gate for 9% bonus move speed in werewolf form as well. After that, we move to the defensive node cluster, and of course we're grabbing Blood Howl, which heals you for 20% of your maximum life as its base. We then take its enhancement as well, which lowers the cooldown by 1 second for every enemy killed, and then Preserving Blood Howl for a 15% attack speed boost for 4 seconds after activation, which we keep active pretty constantly in a dense enough field of enemies because of the way the build works. We also grab 3 ranks of Ancestral Fortitude as a passive for a 15% increase to non-physical damage reduction, and 3 ranks of Vigilance as well for 15% damage reduction just in general for 6 seconds after casting a defensive skill, and in pretty much everything that isn't single target you can actually keep this active pretty constantly with Blood Howl casts. After that, we head to the Companion Node skill cluster, and here, for the budget version of the build, you'll want to take Wolves, as well as Enhanced Wolves, which gives them a 20% damage increase multiplier against a lot of things, but most relevantly against poisoned enemies, which everything will be with this build. Then also Ferocious Wolf Pack to give them a 40% lucky hit chance to give you 5% base life as Fortify. Wolves in general has a 50% lucky hit activation chance as a base, so that means that you have a 20% chance or so every time that your wolves hit something to fortify a small chunk, which is great for enabling other aspects of the build and also increasing our tankiness. As we move on to the Wrath cluster, if you are not wanting to use the budget build, then instead of the points that we put in Wolves, you'll want those same points to be in Hurricane, its enhancement as well, and then also Savage Hurricane. This gives you a circle of ongoing damage around you that slows enemies inside of it and also reduces their damage by 20% for the duration, which is a big tankiness buff for us. As well, the other big skill for this build, we put the full 5 points into Rabies. Again, extra range from our gear is important, and again, it can go up to 14 in this build in active combat the same way that Shred can. This applies an extremely strong poison to an enemy that slowly spreads to others around them. We also take its base enhancement to make the poisoning damage increase every second that it's on, and then also natural Rabies to make it spread twice as fast. The only negative of this skill is killing the infected enemy before it has time to spread, so this makes this much less likely if you spread it faster. As for the passives here, we are of course grabbing 1 rank of Neurotoxin so that all poisoned enemies are slowed, but also just as a gateway to let us put the full 3 ranks into Toxic Claws for this build. This makes your critical hits with werewolf skills apply 24% of their base damage as poison. I've got 3 bonus ranks from my amulet, which is the passive that I most recommend on your amulet if you can get it, which brings it up to a silly 45%. This essentially means that you are applying tons of poison constantly that will be boosting our damage a ton overall. And this is why we take crit skills in this damage over time build, is this specific passive. Then we also grab 3 ranks of Envenom, which is a 30% increased crit damage multiplier against poison targets, again fueling Toxic Claws even harder. Then finally in this cluster, if you are using the non-budget build, the one that has Hurricane, you'll want to grab 3 ranks of Elemental Exposure, which just gives Storm skills a 10% lucky hit chance to apply Vulnerable, and this mostly is just so that Hurricane will apply Vulnerable, which gives us higher uptime on that debuff, which just translates to a load more damage in general. In the budget version instead, you will move those 3 points into the Nature's Resolve passive in the Ultimate Node cluster for some more fortified generation. Speaking of which, let's move on to that cluster itself then, and here we're going to be taking Grizzly Rage, of course, an absolute classic ultimate skill. We are pairing it, of course, with both the Rampaging Werebeast aspect and Direwolf aspect too, taking both of its enhancements here. As a whole, this makes it transform you into a Dire Werewolf, boost your movement speed, boost your damage at a rate that increases every second while in the form, reduces spirit cost significantly, grants the Unstoppable buff, give you 8% base life as fortified per second as well, and of course the duration increases for each kill that you get up to 5 bonus seconds of uptime. Then for passives in this cluster, regardless of which version of the build that you're using, you'll want 3 ranks of Defensive Posture for 15% increased fortified generation. Past that, we have our key passive, and things get a little bit interesting here. The choice here is between 2 skills. If you are at 40% crit chance or higher from your gear, which is very achievable with this build, you want Bestial Rampage. Even though we are only taking advantage of one part of this 2-headed bonus, 25% attack speed is genuinely very strong, especially in a build like this that cares about speed of hits far more than it cares about size of hits. And even though the wording on this skill is a bit odd, you do actually keep the attack speed for as long as you stay in werewolf form. More hits means more crits, more poisons, more boosts to Rampaging Werebear. Attack speed is the biggest thing that we can really ask for, and this gives you a bunch of it. If your crit chance is lower than 40%, then instead you want Lupine Ferocity. This makes every 6th werewolf skill hit a guaranteed crit that deals 70% increased damage as well. This can give you 1 strong poison application, which is very, very good to have around, but again, as your crit chance goes higher, the value of a guaranteed crit goes down, and the value of attack speed goes up, so keep that in mind when making this choice. With that then, that's all the skills, so let's move on to our spirit boons. Of course, in the Deer path, we're going to be grabbing Wariness for 10% damage reduction from elites.
What else is new?
Then in the Eagle path, you want to take Swooping Attacks for 10% increased attack speed. In the Wolf path, we do our Spirit Bond here, allowing us to have 2 boons. You want Bolster for 10% of your max life as Fortify whenever you use a defensive skill, but then also you want Calamity for 25% increased ultimate skill duration. Then in the Snake path, you're going to be taking Masochistic, which makes crits with shapeshifting skills heal you for 3% max life. This provides absolutely massive constant healing with this build, which is obviously incredible to have. After that, we're going to be going over our Legendaries and the potential uniques that you want for this build as well. First up, of course, is Tempest Roar. This makes your Storm skills count as werewolf skills as well as shapeshifting skills, which is why the big boy version of the build has both Storm Strike and also Hurricane Hurricane. This enables more buildup of poison through the Toxic Claw passive on your Hurricane crits, as well as the defensive aspect of that skill too. If you don't have this and want to run the budget version of the build instead, I'd recommend a helmet that has the aspect of the Protector on it for a nice big barrier when engaging an elite, just for the extra defense against harder enemies. Past this, Mad Wolf's Glee is also fantastic in this build. It says that it provides 2 ranks to werewolf skills, but in reality it actually applies 3 bonus ranks. Simply look at my shred after I have this on, then I take it off and look at my shred again. That is 3 ranks lower, so even though it says that it gives you +2 ranks to werewolf skills, it's actually +3. It's just not telling you the truth. On top of that, the inherent affixes on this piece of gear are great for us. Physical damage increase, poison damage increase, damage reduction from poisoned enemies, and then also movement speed, which is never bad to have around. This is always good to use for blasting equal level content, farming, or slightly above level nightmare dungeons, such as just general farming for experience or for low level gear. But if you want to go into particularly hard stuff, you should swap this piece out for a chest piece that has the vigorous aspect on it instead, which gives you up to 15% damage reduction while in werewolf form, and we're constantly in werewolf form when we're in combat. Then the final optional unique is actually Waxing Gibbous. This makes kills with shred put you in stealth. Breaking that stealth gives you guaranteed crits for a short duration. This is awesome if your crit chance stat is low in general, but it suffers significantly in single target encounters where you cannot activate it properly. So while it is an option if your stats aren't great, I actually don't recommend using this one in the finished build at all. Instead, I've got the accelerating aspect on my weapon, which makes crits with core skills give you up to 25% increased attack speed for 5 seconds, which obviously is just constantly active within the build. We are using a one-handed and offhand setup as well for this, which just gives us higher base attack speed to stack off of, as well as letting us have a bonus legendary aspect even if it is weaker than having one aspect on a two-handed weapon. The attack speed though really matters for this build, and the stats on a totem can be pretty fantastic as well. So our only boosted legendary is actually our amulet slot for 50% bonus effectiveness, and this is where we have the aspect of the Blurred Beast. This makes Shred deal up to 150% of the poisoning damage that is applied to an enemy when it dashes for an attack, which happens when you're out of melee range from your target, and this is also why we take the enhancement that makes Shred dash with every attack. So you sort of want to purposefully dash away from your main target to activate this aspect when you shred back in. The thing that makes both this aspect and the build so strong is the way that it interacts with Toxic Claws, because it specifically does not consume the poison that is applied to an enemy. It just deals the same amount in a burst. This skill on an amulet makes it deal up to 150% of that poison damage, and if you can get Toxic Claws at 6 ranks with the amulet boost, makes it apply 45% of the base damage as poison. So essentially, if you crit with a Blurred Beast Shred Dash, it applies about 70% of the poison damage that target was already taking, which stacks with the poison they already had ticking, and you can keep dashing into them over and over and then walking out and going back through to keep stacking that poison higher and higher to reach ridiculous heights, which is what makes this build capable of the nasty things that it can do. Past that, we also have the aspect of the Rampaging Werebeast for bonus Grizzly Rage time, and also the stacking crit damage multiplier every time you get a crit within Grizzly Rage, as well as Direwolf's aspect to make Grizzly Rage a wolf skill, and the secondary effects of this too that we talked about earlier. We take the aspect of Retaliation for up to a 40% increased damage multiplier on Shred, depending on how much Fortify we have. Then our final offensive one changes a little bit depending on which build version that you're using. If you have wolves in the build, you'll want to use the aspect of the Alpha. This turns your wolves into werewolves and makes them spread your rabies faster, as well as just increasing their general damage. The main benefit of this though is the rabies spreading, but they also just look pretty cool to have around, so this is just sort of fun. If you are not using wolves though, you instead want to use the Stormclaw aspect. I know this is a poison shred build and this is a lightning shred aspect, but it still stacks up a ton of damage, as a lot of this build is about getting crits with shred, which will just make it apply tons of lightning splash damage as well as a result of this. Then on your boots is the last variable legendary. If you are using Tempest Roar and therefore using Hurricane, you want the Storm Shifter aspect here, which gives shape-shifting aspects +2 ranks while Hurricane is active. This applies to every skill in the build in the Tempest Roar version, so this is just tons of value. Otherwise, you want the Ghost Walker aspect on your boots, which lets you walk through enemies and get a movement speed buff while Grizzly Rage is active and for 4 seconds afterwards. Finally then, in your leg slot, you of course want the Disobedience aspect. This is incredible in pretty much every single build in the entire game, giving you a stacking % armor buff every time that you deal damage, but this is especially great in a poison build as poison damage, when applied, ticks twice per second per enemy. That builds up stacks of disobedience like crazy, so you can hit 100 stacks in just a couple of moments in combat if you jump in the right way. That's it for the legendary aspects then, and the uniques. A lot to go over here for the variation of the build, but put simply, the strongest version of the build offensively uses Tempest Roar and Mad Wolf's Glee. The strongest defensively uses just Tempest Roar. As for stats in general, you'll want bonus ranks to Shred on your gloves above all else. This fuels all of our damage really, and you also want bonus ranks to Rabies on your legs, as this fuels a lot of our poison building and reapplication. You want bonus ranks to Toxic Claws on your amulet if you can, but that is a much harder thing to find. You want crit chance wherever you can get it, including your totem. Attack speed you want as much as you can get as well. Crit damage, vulnerable damage, all that good stuff for offense too. Damage to poisoned enemies and damage to close enemies is also really good. You want armor percent increase in werewolf form on at least one piece of your gear, ideally your boots. General total armor percent on one piece as well is ideal. You want damage reduction from close enemies, damage reduction from poisoned enemies, damage reduction while fortified, and of course movement speed is helpful, but with Shred dashing you around constantly, it's not the most required things by any means. With all of that covered, then let's move on to our absolutely chonky honkin' Paragon board.
Weird way to say that.
On your starting board, you want to head up the left side through the max life and armor nodes here, then curve around to reach the glyph socket in the middle and slot in the territorial glyph. This gives you bonus damage to close enemies for every 5 dexterity purchased nearby, as well as 10% damage reduction from close enemies as the bonus effect when activated. Grab the nodes that I have here in the radius to give it a nice big healthy damage bonus, then progress up the left side through the damage increase rare node to the board attachment gate. Here you want to attach the Heightened Malice board with the legendary node in the top right corner. Head immediately left, sticking mostly to the outer edge, then wrap up to the glyph socket and slot in the Spirit glyph for bonus crit damage with core skills for every 5 dexterity in the radius, as well as a stacking damage increase multiplier every time that you get a crit on an enemy, again benefiting our high attack speed goals. Then continue wrapping around the outer edge to reach the left side board attachment gate and stick on the Inner Beast board with the legendary node on the left side of the board. Take the lower path here to reach the glyph socket there and then slot in the Fang and Claw glyph for a bonus to magic nodes in the radius, as well as an additional bonus of a 12% damage increase multiplier against close enemies in werewolf form. Then head down to grab the rare and magic nodes that I have here and wrap around to the attack increasing rare and magic nodes over here as well. Don't continue this path yet though, we'll come back to this later. For now, instead go back to the glyph socket and head up through the armor and willpower node, wrap around through the maximum life and armor increase rare node, then one more time around here for the Havoc rare node, which gives you critical strike damage and physical damage, and also grab the critical strike damage increasing magic nodes that are beside it too. Then exit out the top side of the board and attach the Lust for Carnage board with the legendary node on the left side. Head up and then immediately left to grab some more attack speed here, which is obviously wonderful to have. Then you want to head up back through the main path and grab the glyph socket itself and slot in the Bane glyph. This gives you bonus poison damage for every 5 intelligence purchased in the radius, as well as a secondary effect of a 10% chance for poisoning effects to deal double damage over the same duration. After that, you want to head left, grabbing the intelligence nodes along the way to get to the legendary node itself, which gives critical strikes with werewolf skills the ability to restore 2 spirit to you every time that you do it. Then from the glyph socket, head up to grab the rare and magic nodes here, which boost werewolf skill damage, then head out of the right side of the board here to attach on the Ancestral Guidance board with the legendary node in the top left. Take the first willpower here, then wrap around the board on the top side to get to the legendary node on the board for a 30% damage increase multiplier for 5 seconds after you spend 75 spirits, which will be happening constantly, of course. Then from the initial willpower that we got, wrap around through the magic nodes over here to get to the glyph socket and stick in the Undaunted glyph, giving you bonus damage while fortified for every 5 intelligence purchased in the radius. Grab the core skill damage rare node over here and the surrounding magic nodes, which also activates the glyph's bonus effect, then head out of the bottom of the board to reconnect to Heightened Malice. Use this to slyly wrap around the board and actually collect the legendary node itself for a 45% increased damage multiplier to anything that you do while there are 3 or more poisoned enemies around you. This doesn't apply to single target fights, but it does apply to pretty much everything else, as we are poisoning constantly on everything. Then for our final step, you want to head back to the Inner Beast board and head to the board attachment gate at the bottom. Here you want to stick on the Constricting Tendrils board with the glyph socket on the top left corner. Then you want to path directly over to that socket and stick in the Tracker glyph. This increases damage that you do against poisoned enemies for every 5 dexterity in the radius, as well as the bonus effect of a 33% increased duration of poison effects, which also increases the damage damage of Blurred Beast, consuming said poison as well. Using your last few points, you want to get the exact amount of dexterity here that activates this effect, and then you are done. A near perfect Paragon board that I'm actually quite proud of. That's everything as far as what you need and how to set it all up, so what about how to actually play the build? Well, quite simply, you want to engage enemies with Rabies, let it start spreading, then just get shredding through a pack. The optimal way to play this is to actively target an enemy that is far away from you so that you dash through an entire group, then immediately flip the target back to the other side so you dash back through the group, then just go back and forth on repeat. If it crits, it stacks the poison damage, which stacks the Blurred Beast damage even higher, and it also just makes you look like a giant furry ping pong ball of death. If you have elites around, use Grizzly Rage and start stacking up your crit multipliers. You want Hurricane active as often as possible if you are using that version of the build. You want to use your basic skill only when you don't have the spirit to use Shred itself. Press Blood Howl whenever it's up, it is always good. As for specific tips, you can play pretty fast and loose against easier tier Nightmare dungeons, but when you get to about 15 to 20 levels above you, the smartest way to play it is to engage a group with Rabies, then back off to let Rabies spread around and get on multiple enemies, which will also build up your disobedient stacks, then just run in and start dashing around with Shred once most of the enemies are already poisoned. This gives you a moment to build up defensives and let Blurred Beast really do its teleportation thing rather than just shoving your face into dangerous enemies without a care. And that just about does it then, everyone. Everything you need to know to make the Acid Rain Poison Shred Druid build. I'm really happy with how this turned out, and you've been asking me to make my own poison build for a while now. We've got a budget version for those without uniques, we've got a surprisingly strong version for those with some uniques, an offensive variant, a defensive variant. There's a lot going on here, so I hope it all helps you out in some way, and I hope you all enjoyed both the video and also the build itself if you go and try it out for yourself. Let me know what other kinds of Druid builds you want to see in the future as I continue messing around with more off-meta stuff, with the one exception being Boulder. I tried to make a Boulder build work for 2 days, and it just, I could not, no matter how much gold and time that I sunk into it, make it actually function properly, and that makes me really sad because there's legendaries around, but hey, at least Poison Wolf is strong as hell, okay? Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.